This is an absolute disaster. What kind of clothes are these? That's because you're supposed to wear that. I told you that's how my elves and fairies look. Then how come for the last 50 pages you have said over and over again that elves don't wear red? It looks too bloody. You're being difficult. If it needs to be changed later, I'll change it later during edits. Well, I'm going to tell the editor. Yeah, he's going to force you to change. He's not going to like this. Yeah, go ahead. Go tell the editor. I'll go back to what I'm doing. With world building, it makes everything feel realistic and alive. So like I said, Charlie Dorsett's channel, please check them out. They have some really great videos, and I've put their channel linked down below in the description box. So with that said, there are 2 books that I would like to showcase how I world built them while I was actually writing them. And that's how I do it. I world build while writing. I actually have one of them. This is actually an early part of a Grim Reaper book that I did. I call them Death Walkers because that is my Grim Reapers. When I'm writing them, I actually write everything by hand, like I have said before, and I do world building while I'm writing. It can get kind of interesting when it comes to the editing because there's so much that I actually have to fix. And my editor comes to me with lots of questions about why certain things are. And if I don't have the actual answer for him, I have to be able to come up with it. Sometimes that means rewriting whole passages, if not rewriting half the book. It's something that I have taken upon being a pantser, not a planner. So with the Grim Reaper, the Death Walker book that I had started, book 1, took place in Baltimore, Maryland, but it had a heavy portion of it that dealt with Egypt. And I'm actually a personal fan of ancient Egyptian culture. I even visited Cairo and Luxor in 2004. And there I got to actually see the culture that I've always been fascinated with my own eyes. And I took what I learned from being in that place itself, actually going to the pyramids, going to see the Temple of Karnak and the Temple of Queen Hatshepsut. I went through all of those, and when the time came to call upon the Egyptian culture in the Death Walkers, I pulled from what I knew. But since that was about 6 or so years outside of when I was in Egypt, there were other things I took into account. One of the things that I did was I grabbed books and websites and stuff about Egypt because their information changes from time to time. Things about new discoveries and all of that, they change after a while. So I always encourage, when you're doing world building, to keep up on the current trends as well, because information from cultures, they change. We only know certain things, but that doesn't stop other Egyptologists or archaeologists from going and learning more. Other things I did was I concentrated on props, like this one right here. This is actually an obsidian replica of King Tutankhamun's tomb. Well, not tomb, but his casket. And they actually put a mummy in there too. It's a really fun replica. It helped me think about what Queen Nefertari, who is my pharaoh that comes back to life in the Death Walker book, would have looked like, and how she would have come in to America itself. The main character was allowed to bring the mummy back over. Other things I did was I took in the account of, like, the Book of the Dead. Now, in mine it's different because I actually have it leather bound, and binding didn't happen until about the, it was in France, And that was when they started doing bookbinding itself. But before then, the Egyptians did papyrus scrolls. This is actually I'm going to cover my face a little for you guys, but this is actually a replica of the Book of the Dead. There's a passage of it, and I actually bought this in Luxor in 2004. The shop that I got it from was absolutely gorgeous, with a lot of murals and a lot of paintings, depictions of their culture. And what was fascinating was not only was the papyrus handmade, like people still kept alive the old ways. They hand painted it. They had people that were teaching themselves how to do the old ways. And I took all of this into account when writing this book. Aside from Egypt, I also did other things. I learned about military systems. My Deathwalker military system is not like, you know, ours. I treat them more like a Red Cross auxiliary unit, because these Grim Reapers aren't supposed to kill humans. They're not supposed to touch humans at all. But they would take the souls, the ghosts of the humans. So they had to be on the battlefield, even if they weren't going to actually go in and kill people. So what I did was I also looked at books like this one and other books that were like it about ghosts, because I figured ghosts were, since they were the primary focus of what I was dealing with, it was good to kind of see their hauntings, kind of see, you know, what people considered paranormal activity and how poltergeists might act versus how, you know, just faint memories of a life before. Because they talk about how some ghosts don't even know they're dead. You know, it's fascinating mythology when you try to look into paranormal and things of that nature. I also liked looking into, you know, remnants. A lot of people say that a ghost can leave after images and remnants when it comes to, like, smells. Like we've got, this is actually Egyptian musk, which is a smell that I really enjoyed using at, during, whenever my main character was around the Egyptian mummy and stuff, because they say that there was always, like, little things of musk and stuff like that in Egypt, and it was really nice for me to kind of understand how things came together. How would an archaeologist do things? I did research archaeology, only a small bit because I'm not a professor or anything, but I researched like the tools it would use and how long it might take to go on a dig site. Some of this, I will be completely honest, I researched after writing the book, because as a pantser, I just want to write the book and kind of live the story and really enjoy it. But sometimes I get things wrong. Sometimes I think I know, but I don't, so I have to go in and relearn and rewrite it so that it actually makes sense. When I write a book for the first time, it's for me to experience the story and the feels that that story gives me. It's not necessarily to make sure everything is correct. But I also know that that is a book that only I'm going to see and my editor. And that's fine, because we both know that I will come in and sometimes have things a little wrong. But when I start going through the editing process, that's when I start bringing things out. Like my leather journals, other leather journals that go along with the book. In this one, I actually have my Deathwalkers and their hierarchy system, and I also have certain levels of the ghosts, because ghosts aren't just ghosts in my book. They have, you know, if they've eaten this many people versus not eating any people, it actually affects what they are and how they act. And I record everything, because then that actually gives me a consistency. Because when I'm writing the first couple of drafts, there's really no consistency. It's just me and my imagination. If I'm stuck during the writing process, I then start role-playing. like you had seen a few moments ago. By role-playing, talking to myself, becoming those characters, I get to learn about them. And I think that's more of what my first drafts are. My first drafts are really about trying to get the characters right before I start shifting into making sure that the facts are all straight. With that said, I don't talk about sensitive issues in cultures because I do not feel that they have a place in my books, since I'm not talking about cultures. I'm talking about fantastical things like ghosts and dead people, you know. We're talking about a society that I have created all of my own. And that's also where stuff like this comes from that you guys talk about, my little skulls, because as somebody who loves Grim Reapers, like I said, Deathwalkers for me, I very much enjoy having things around me while I'm writing that remind me of what I'm writing. That includes music, so sometimes I will have dark type of music so that people can, well, people can't, but I can hear it. So another book that I want to talk about is my Mystic Emporium, which is actually about twisted fairy tales and mythology. So as I was saying, books about fairies, because I like to go in and actually look at the myth about certain different types of fae, because fairies they branch out. They're not just they're not just the small little Tinkerbell fairies that some people think, find in Disney. I also look up other creatures like mermaids, things like that, because there are times when I start, there are books, since these are series, there are different books that I include different creatures in eventually. It might not be book one, but I like to think ahead of time of what I'm going to find. I also decide to look up different monsters that I can bring in. Like this is actually a mythical creatures Bible as well, but it talks about monsters that go bump in the night. This is nature spirits section. There's a section about vampires, and you really get a chance to learn a lot about the creatures that may or may not show up in your books. With the Mystic Emporium, I was also thinking about scents, like I did with the Deathwalkers. Like this one is actually called Titania, and it gave a little woodsy scent, which is what I like to do and think of. And there are times when I'll actually put the perfume of what I'm trying to write about on my skin, or I'll utilize it as a candle. Sometimes it just helps me get lost into the book itself. Now, how both of these books came very close together is, since they both took place in Baltimore itself. I write in Baltimore because that's where I live, so it makes it a little easier for me to go to those places. I like to visit a lot of the places that I go to in my books. For the Deathwalkers, it actually took place in a cafe, so I wanted to go to that place because there actually was a cafe there at one point. So I kind of like to know how it was, how it looked when you were there, how it looked out when you were inside the cafe, and what the surroundings were like, what the smells were like, and what were the people around there like, how many cars went by during certain types of the day, was there a park nearby, and things like that. It gives you a sense, and that's why I enjoy writing in a place where I live, because it's easier to visit. There are places I can't visit, like Scotland and Ireland and Egypt, on a whim. So that's when the internet comes in handy, and you can Google map it, so you can kind of see what things look like. You could find 3D pictures, 3D tours. You could, again, just do pictures and look up information and try to replicate as best as possible. What fascinated me with Mystic Emporium, and why I decided to put the goblins underneath Baltimore in the sewer system, was I learned about how in the later 1800s, early 1900s, Baltimore didn't actually have a sewer system. They were using a cart and a horse with the fire brigade to go around and take, dumps and pails and all the people's sewage, and go down to the poor sections to release it. And they would gather it. And for a long time, the residents were talking about how they needed a plumbing system because, I hate to say it, but the rich people were upset that they had to smell the poor people's refuse. That's putting it mildly. And I even looked up old newspaper articles about this, and I found it quite fascinating. Like, Baltimore knew many years prior that they needed to have a system where they could put their waste somewhere, and the city kept holding it off. And it wasn't until 1904, when the Great Fire happened in Baltimore, that it gave Baltimore that chance to actually start their sewer system, because it burned much of the city. And they decided to model that system off of the French canals and French sewer systems in Paris. And so these are man-sized tunnels. There's actually a picture of some of the mayors, I think it was 2 mayors at the time, in Baltimore with their cars driving down one of its tunnel systems. It's quite fascinating to see how large the Baltimore sewer systems are underneath. The sad part is that even now, over 100 years ago, or over 100 years now, the sewer systems haven't been completely updated. The terracotta, wood, and mud, or whatever they had for concrete back then, they haven't been all replaced. If a line breaks or something needs to be repaired, then the sanitation department will open it up and repair it. But there's never been a full repair of these tunnels. And so what I did was I started utilizing the fact that the tunnels are in disrepair. There are places where it's very easy for wildlife to walk in there, for humans to walk in there, because it's just, some places are still crumbling. And I decided, what would happen if we had goblins go inside and start burrowing and making huge caverns out of this? And what they did is I had them use the tunnels as basically support beams, as they were able to start making use of the stalactites, stalagmites that could be down there if there was a cave, because I put a cave down there. And the only thing that was keeping the city from collapsing were these 100-year-old tunnels that are used for our sewer system. And all of this really came to me because when you travel into Inner Harbor during like the early hours of the morning, and sometimes at night where there's not that many people, you'll actually see steams and billowing rises of steam. And some of it's so dark you can't even travel through without seeing properly. And I was wondering what would happen if there was like this huge industrial age type beast underneath the city. And that's kind of where the goblins came from. But when you think of the fascinating little pictures you can find, and then you read news articles and you uncover so much information, it starts building a story. And that's how my world building takes shape. That's how my books take shape, is through little questions, and then I expand upon them and I build. And so that's my world building. So in conclusion, I wanted to thank you for coming along with me to see how I world build. I was only showing you 2 books, but that's because those are the 2 most recent books, so it's easier for me to remember what I do with that world building. I find that world building while you're writing. It's almost like being a tourist in another country. You get to learn as you go, which can be very fascinating and an adventure in and of itself. I'd love to know how you guys world build. I know some people that are planners that plan to the absolute minute detail before they even write sentence 1 down. Are you that type of world builder? Or are you kind of like me, where you just kind of pick up as you go and then solidify when you're done, even if it means going through 12 edits? I'd love to start a conversation and see what you do. What else would you like to learn about world building? I am more than happy to talk about certain strategies that you might be interested in, or even where you might be able to find world building resources. So thank you very much for coming along with me on this trip, and enjoy your writing. Have a great day, guys.